this time, I'd like to turn this over to James Spear to continue our program. I should note that James, a member of the faculty at City Maritime College, has spearheaded this event for New York Council, and I appreciate all his efforts in bringing this day together. James, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much for those kind remarks, Frank, and thank you to Beth Rooney for a great opening presentation. If we can just give another round of applause. It truly, in my opinion, set the stage for the rest of today. As Frank had mentioned, my name is James Spear. I teach at City Maritime College. I'm the board secretary of the New York Council of the Navy League and today's program chair. I echo exactly as well his thanks to our panelists, to our participants, to our sponsors. We literally could not have done this without you, so thank you very much for those who've come across the country. Whether you've come from down the street or across the country, we're very grateful for it. For 248 years, the U.S. Merchant Marine has served the nation, as we've heard today. In times of need and times of prosperity, those who sail under the U.S. flag and support it have risen to the challenge. And their energy, sacrifice, and dedication have been indispensable to the country's success. Together with their colleagues ashore, U.S. seafarers have kept America moving and continue to do so. As we face a multitude of challenges and uncertainties, known, unknown, and currently unknowable, the U.S. maritime community will continue to underwrite our collective economic prosperity and support our national defense. As such, I can think of no more appropriate panel to start the day's conversations than the next one. That is the U.S. fleet, as you'll see in your programs, the U.S. fleet serving the nation and growing the economy. The panel is moderated by Ken, President of the American Maritime Congress. We hope today's conversation will be thoughtful, substantive, and I have every reason to believe this next, and all of our panels, but certainly this next one will be so. So, Ken.
It's great to see everyone here bright and early. Our panelists here, right, make their way up on the stage. So you can read their bios. I'd like to go ahead and get right into it. Tremendous bios, the four gentlemen that we have on stage here. Really thought leaders, advocates, very, very forward-leaning on not just the U.S. flag commercial industry, but also the maritime industry at large, internationally. We heard Beth Rooney earlier today talk about the challenges that we face as a nation with the diminishing footprint of the U.S. flag fleet. And so I'd like to go ahead and get right in it right now, and I'll start on the far end with Ryan Pereyda, the Principal CEO of Patriot Maritime. I want to throw a question out there, and this is for all four gentlemen. Really, what was the time and point of inflection that you decided to make maritime your career?
Yeah, so I grew up in California in the Valley, near the Delta. So I got pretty lucky in high school. I started a program called Sea Scouts. It was a great opportunity for me to understand sort of just water stuff, and I learned about the maritime academies, and I think that was a big pivot for me. Started from there, sailed, and then eventually owned a shipping company. But I think it all started from that Sea Scouts, where I learned about what it is maritime industry is.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Kevin O'Hara. I started my career out at First National Bank of Maryland in Baltimore, coming out of college. Went through the credit training program, and if you did so successfully, you had the chance to go through different areas of the bank, one of which was the Maritime Group, and they were lending worldwide at the time, which was a bit unique for a small bank. And I got into the community, saw what a tight community it was, how innovative it was, and how important it was, and caught the bug there and haven't left.
Dion?
Yeah, hey, good morning. Similar to Ryan, I grew up in a small town in Hawaii, surfing on the beach, and I didn't have a really plan for life. I walked into a Coast Guard recruiting office and wanted to be a rescue swimmer. And they said, well, you should try this. And I ended up going to Coast Guard Academy, was misled that they don't allow officers to be rescue swimmers. So I ended up going to sea for about 7 years of my 12-year Coast Guard career. My last duty, I was a commanding officer in the Middle East, B-15 Al Basra Oil Terminal, and was wondering why the Coast Guard was there, watching these VLCCs and Suezmaxes load oil, and I spent a lot of time on the bridge in the captain's chair, reading about oil tankers, etc. And when I got out, became an oil broker, freight broker, and been in Maritime for about 10 years since I departed the Coast Guard.
Morning, my name is Sam Norton. I'm the president and CEO of Overseas Shipbuilding Group. We are a U.S. flag tanker and articulated tug barge operating company. We also have ships that trade internationally under the Tanker Security Program. My career, I say all the time, I have virtually no qualifications for what I do. I studied Chinese when I was, a long time ago, when I was in college. That took me to Asia in the late 70s. Like Kevin, I found my way into the world community through the financial community. I worked for the First National Bank of Boston in Far East, first in Taiwan and then in Hong Kong. I was fortunate enough to be in Asia at a time when Asia was beginning to emerge as the principal commercial partner for the United States and the rest of the world. That took me through the banking community that I was working in. Took me into the maritime sector through the bank's lending activities in Hong Kong in the 1980s. I feel extremely fortunate to have been exposed to the emergence of the emergence of the container shipping industry, which was just in its infancy in the 80s, and the whole transformation of maritime commerce as Asia became a much more important part of our commercial strategy. I came back to the United States in the early part of this century. I had my own shipping company for a little while, and then I joined the board of Overseas Shipbuilding Group in 2014, and took on an executive role in 2016, which has been my job since.
Thanks. And I wanted to ask that question because I thought it brought out a theme, whether it was Sea Scouts to banking or studying abroad. Many of us end up in maritime not deliberately, right? We kind of have incidental or adjacent aspects of it. Most people, I'd say, in maritime don't have a maritime background through their families or things like that. And it's something we should probably all reflect on here as we hear the theme of this mariner shortage, and also talk about recruitment, retention of our great industry, and why we find ourselves at this crossroads right now, where we seem to be on our back foot, a little flat-footed at times as a U.S. industry. So thank you for sharing those experiences. And let's go ahead and get in. And by the way, I should have said this earlier, but the interest that we have here on stage, excluding myself, of course, is tremendous. And if, again, looking at the bios, there's a lot of firepower here. We're going to have some time for questions at the end, and really, really encourage folks to think of thoughtful questions, because the impact of these four gentlemen up here on the U.S. shipping, again, and not just U.S. shipping, but shipping in general, four principals, CEOs, presidents, or managing directors right here, really movers and shakers right here, whether it's East Coast, West Coast, Manhattan to DC, on the cutting edge of what makes U.S. shipping, U.S. flag fleet what it is. There's been a lot of talk in the news. There's been some mergers. There's been some combination of entities here. I'm going to go ahead and, again, start with Kevin, because you are still in the M&A side. You're still on the financing side right now. Where do you see the trend going with all of these? I'll let you talk about the mergers that you think have happened recently that are most impactful on our industry, not just commercially, but also the impact that they might have on national security.
Sure, thank you. I think that one of the more public M&A deals that was done recently was for a company called American Shipping, which is near and dear to Sam's heart since they charter in all the vessels, most of their vessels, I should say. That just changed hands to a firm called Maritime Partners, which is a relatively new financing firm down in New Orleans, fairly innovative. They've created effectively an investment fund backed by Jones Act for the most part vessels, and they have an income-driven fund whereby they pay out steady dividends to their investors from their investments. They've also were announced recently as being a purchaser of USMMI, which some of you were probably familiar with, an arm of Maersk that Maersk decided to sell off, and that includes several vessels in the TSP program, a couple vessels that are going into the Red Hill, and then an MSV, which is probably one of the most public classified vessels ever built and operated. But I think what you see here is a transition a little bit from the operator community into the hands of now private equity investment funds of these vessels that are strategic, very important to the United States fleet, both domestically and worldwide. And it's interesting to see that they obviously have to have the security clearances and whatnot, but to see those vessels changing hands, I think that is a trend that will continue. Private equity has made a very dedicated investment in the space, and I think will continue to do so.
Dion, I'd like to ask you, you have a background also in private equity, and now you've shifted to the operational side as the CEO of Schuyler Navigation Company. Do you see any trends with the private equity movement that we've had in the last few years, and how that impacts not just SLNC's operations, but again, with an eye towards national security and how that impacts national security?
Sure. Yeah, so private equity is no stranger to shipping and shipping cycles. I think Sandwich has been around for the last one. I think there was a big influx on the international side in private equity maybe a decade or so ago, and that's more of an asset play on buying and selling assets, waiting for appreciation, playing the cycles. On the U.S. flag, it's a little unique. The U.S. flag in itself is very niche, as Beth accurately described. I mean, when you can count the number of vessels, like 90 something non-Jones Act, 180 Jones Act, deep water, it's a very finite space. It's a very small space with few companies. And kind of coincidentally, a lot of these companies aren't necessarily owned by U.S. citizens. Non-Section 2, if you look at our fleet, a lot of them are basically owned by larger foreign conglomerates, such as Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, CMA, CGM. So you have a few companies that are actually U.S. based, U.S. domiciled, U.S. run in that aspect of it. And I think consolidation is good because it's difficult to run specifically a U.S. flag company. It's probably the most difficult and challenging flag in the world to maintain. And I think you can get efficiencies from some sort of consolidation there and some sort of growth, and as well as recruiting on the mariner pool. So my fund, Nova Infrastructure, as a fund, it's not a space that we actively target for an infrastructure fund, North American focused, and we don't view it as a shipping investment. We view it as a logistics investment for the U.S. government and Department of Defense, and that's a space that my board and myself have a lot of experience in, and we look at a lot of assets plus across the supply chain, not just shipping in that space, and we'll continue to do so. But we're looking to grow. I think all of us up here collectively, and I think in this room, we need to grow the entire U.S. Flag fleet, U.S. mariner pool, and the strength of the U.S. Supply chain on the ocean, and not just M&A and some consolidation here and there. That's not really growing the pie.
Great. Well, let's talk tankers. Kevin brought it up, but it's a big issue, and you've got some of the premier minds in the tanker business here. Sam, I'd like to ask you, as someone who's been around the tanker business, how important is the tanker security program run by MARAD, and you just recently authorized and appropriated to national security, but also to the maintenance of the healthy U.S. flag industry?
So, for those of you who are not familiar with the tanker security program, it was recently stood up by the Transportation Department under the administration of MARAD, with a lot of thanks for a lot of work that was put into making that happen. Today it consists of a program of 10 tankers. medium-range tankers that are militarily useful in the carriage of jet fuel and diesel. The intention is to be able to create a fleet that trades internationally on a competitive basis with other international flag vessels. That's difficult because the cost structure of operating a U.S. flagship is higher than it is operating an international flagship. So the program provides for stipends to partially offset the additional cost of running a U.S. flagship, but it also gives the participants in that program access to government preference cargoes, mostly fuel cargoes that are moved between military operations around the world, and the combination of the commercial trading of the vessel, the stipend, and the access, most importantly in my view, the access to the preference cargoes makes the program commercially viable. The underpinnings of the program really rest on strategic evaluation of requirements that the United States military would have in a Indo-Pacific conflict. And Dion has characterized it, any kind of conflict in the Pacific would be an away game. There are tremendous distances between supply points or secure supply points in the United States and in the Western Hemisphere, and the need for that fuel and other supply requirements for conflict in the Pacific, a wide expanse of ocean between supply and use points. The studies that have come out that are not classified indicate that as many as 100 tankers would be of the size that are now currently operating the tanker security program. 100 tankers would be the minimum requirement to support an extended conflict in the Pacific. Today that program now has 10. There are 43 tankers that trade under the Jones Act, but the view of people that think about strategy is that those vessels are unlikely to be made available to support a conflict in the Pacific, because if you take those ships away from the United States, then the domestic economy would be strangling because of the inability to move fuel around the United States to support any kind of conflict. So the beginnings of this program with 10 ships is very heartening. I think the view, and as well as mentioned, our commitment here is to try and expand the U.S. flag fleet generally, and to do that through programs like the Tanker Security Program. To me, is the real most promising pathway to being able to achieve that objective. We need obviously two component parts to be able to expand that fleet. One is the hardware, ships themselves. The Tanker Security Program interestingly allows for ships that are not built in the United States to be participants in that program. So efforts to work with other allies overseas to be able to access shipbuilding capacity in a way that would be supportive of this program, I think, is a critical element of how we build this program. But even more importantly than the hardware of the tankers themselves, the most important thing that we need to do is we need to deepen and broaden the pool of qualified mariners that we have in the United States. This is a critical objective that we, as an industry and together with our partners in government, and hopefully some of you who are here today that are students and looking for a career in the maritime industry. To me, this is the most vital resource that we need to develop in order to ensure the continuing prosperity of our country and the thriving existence of the U.S. flag.
Great, and there's an allusion to an overall strategy of the U.S. What about a national maritime strategy, and why is that so important? I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Dion. Can you explain, first of all, what the national maritime strategy is, and how important is it?
I think the strategy itself in the broad scheme is important. You know, I'm not exactly sure when the last one was published. The national maritime,
I think
the last published national maritime.
Plus years, yeah, let's call it 10 years.
Okay, so I guess it's been 10 plus years. I believe there's one in the works right now. I think it's a cohesive plan, class and unclassified, and I think there's some ambiguity in that sometimes. Being on the commercial side, on the government side, on that, and I could pass it over as well. It does feel sometimes like the right hand's not talking to the left hand in some of the growth strategy. of the fleet itself. You know, the tanker program, I think, has taken a long time to get underway. I know Marriott's been pounding the table on that for not maybe a decade, I'm not exactly sure, and we're already, you know, trying to get to the next step. So I think we're seeing glimmers of hope on that, but I think it needs to be certainly accelerated. And you know, we see what's going on in DC and today, and these are the challenges. I think some of these strategies and some of the growth of the fleet are up against is you know, just DC politics, and sometimes it seems like childish games in there. And you know, we went from, I think there's 19 U.S. flag tankers internationally right now if you count the coastal tankers, which Ryan and I might have, but if we go back maybe 6 months ago, that number was probably less than 10. And I think that's thanks to the help of, you know, Marriott, and certainly there was a need for the Red Hill fuel issue in Hawaii, which accelerated the kind of bringing in a few tankers on there. But it's a fragmented plan at best right now. I think industry-wide, I think that you probably hear that from a lot of the other executives. So I'll turn over to Ryan as well, who manages a fleet of a lot of ships.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, for me, kind of obvious we need a cohesive strategy. I think someone said there's 1,000 ships being built a year in China, which is obviously a serious concern for us, and why we're seeing an increase in tankers. I think I read they have about 150 shipyards. They have about 5,000 ships across the industry. We have so few. And I think that cohesive strategy of being able to support, I'm going to steal again from Dion, an away game is such a good term. It really is. And so a cohesive strategy is extremely important for how we're going to deal with that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I'll follow on, I'll make a pitch for Coast Guard and Marriott as well. It's extremely underfunded if you look at the grand scheme of things. We deal with roadblocks as an industry every day, which are routine from, and it's from August here when he was in charge. National Maritime Credentialing Center, hold up to the credentialing center due to lack of technology, routine technology, which you would see in almost, would be unheard of if you were just in the commercial sector and office space, and the lack of ability for, Marriott to find, recruit, and fund some of these programs. The TSP program alone is $60 million annually. I think the national debt went up $3 billion yesterday. These are very finite numbers, very small, minuscule numbers to have. What the U.S. is blessed with is where their location is. You have a vast ocean, you have the Atlantic and the Pacific on one side, we have strategies in the Pacific and island chains, and the nation was built on naval deterrence and naval strategy, and it's, over the last 100 years, it's all gotten fragmented and probably declined.
Can I just add something, because I think it's an important point. As I said, Overseas Shipbuilding Group is principally a Jones Act operator, and probably everybody in the room understands that the Jones Act is whipping boy of a lot of ideological purists that believe that free markets solve every problem. I'm the first one here to admit that our cost structure is uncompetitive if we have to go head to head with international flag companies. As I mentioned in my sort of career brief, I spent most of my career working for international flag companies. I have an intimate understanding of what the cost structures look like. We just can't compete if we're going head to head, and the ideological purists believe that we should just open our waterways and open our maritime commerce to international competition and let the best company win. I believe that's a really naive strategy, because if you did that, then the skill sets that are necessary to maintain the maritime industry would disappear. We already have a hard enough, difficult enough problem recruiting and restocking the manpower to be able to sustain this industry. If you eliminated the jobs that are able to feed that industry, all those skill sets would go away, and I think that would be a huge detriment. So one of the things that I think is really important for those who are active in interacting with the principals and with Congress, with other people that are involved in trying to develop a maritime strategy, is to convey the urgency of avoiding discussions about making the industry a pure market-driven industry. This is an an industry which provides a community service. We need to understand the most effective and most efficient way to be able to provide that service. It's not necessarily just a pure economic decision.
If I could just tag along there, that one more is, to Sam's point, I think we're getting to the point now where, we're in 2023 and we're looking at our assets and it's under 200, it's under 100 international. It becomes a point of, assured and assumed access to resources. We know what our assured access is, it's 90-something vessels. I think we as a country have an idea of what our assumed partners are. I think that's ever changing, given the geopolitical landscape and the influence in the far Pacific. And we need to grow our assured access, not just in national defense and supply chains, but also domestic commerce, domestic economy, protecting Hawaii, Puerto Rico. These are small islands, and people get on the Jones Act for it, but it's not an attractive international flag stop. What it does is it basically assures that these economies can maintain as well with fuel and resources, and as well as overseas with all our bases and all our service members overseas. So it's growing the assured access is what we need to do as part of our national maritime strategy.
Great. Very insightful. Then we talk about Indo-Pacific. I'd like to start with Kevin, but especially from the financing side, how do you see vis-a-vis the U.S. versus our strategic adversary, China, and how they capitalize, how they recapitalize, moving towards that national security apparatus within maritime, from your perspective as a financier?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with the statements made around whether this is a free market. I'm about as a free market as you get, but I'm not. I would never suggest that there's no space for Jones Act, for example. I think if anything, the pandemic taught us is that we can't rely on the world all the time for everything. When there are shortages of pharmaceuticals, for example, because we import everything. That's to me not sustainable. You see the exact same thing on the push for EVs. All the batteries, all the minerals, everything's mined outside of the U.S. Everything's processed outside of the U.S. And if it was ever came down to it, we know what the countries that mine and process these minerals would do, and who they would prioritize in an event of a conflict. So, in a sense, this is a much broader conversation. I don't think the financing side is not an issue. There are people who will invest equity, they will invest debt in these industries where they make sense. I don't think China, for example, has any kind of advantage over the U.S. If anything, our financial system is much more innovative. But I do think that there is a little bit of a national strategy issue when we're not allowing to have certain lithium mines or other mines where you're mining critical minerals for this energy transition. You're not allowing that to happen in the U.S. for various reasons. So by definition, you're relying on other countries to do so. And other countries have a robust strategy. When we talk about China making 1,000 ships a year, why? 20 years ago, they said, why do we want shipyards? Full employment helps. They want a lot of jobs. But they had a national strategy to build out their Navy. And they also wanted to make sure they had secure access to their natural resources. Iron ore coming from Brazil, iron ore from Australia, oil from everywhere. And they went ahead and they did it. And now we're standing here behind with a very small fleet and hoping and praying that our allies will be there when we need them. But in times of strife, that might not be such an easy thing to rely on.
Yeah, and I'll follow on that logistics has always been winner and loser of wars, right? And then you take two very recent examples of COVID and the supply chain, and then what's going on with Ukraine. And as Dion talked about, assured access. I mean, getting back and forth and supplying, as we see in Ukraine, elements and ammo. And in our case, we're talking about jet fuel to the forward deployment is extremely important against our atmosphere.
Kevin touched on some things that are going on, and I'd like to go ahead and open it up to folks on stage to talk about the trends you see right now. What do you predict are the biggest trends that we're we're seeing in maritime that are going to impact national security. I'll go ahead and start with Sam, and this is anything that is sort of at the moment type of thing, whether it's financing, whether it's operations, whether it's new energy, whether it's alternative fuels, renewable diesel, whatever. What do you think about the most in terms of potential, Sam?
So thanks, Farah. To me, one of the bigger challenges that we face as a company, and I think as an industry, is the ever-changing regulatory environment that we operate in, largely driven by environmental issues. The debate about transitioning away from fossil fuels and how that's going to manifest in the context of the engine types and fuel types that are going to be present for ships in the future. There is no silver bullet right now. There is no clear answer. Hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, LNG, all of these ideas have merits and demerits. None of them really appear to be a clear winner in the way that the industry is going to structure itself in the future. The upshot of that is that decisions about investing in new assets are being deferred both domestically and internationally, I would argue. And so you have an aging fleet as people wait to understand what the new technology that's going to emerge and how, in fact, the regulations are going to emerge to drive that technology. That's our business, our industry is always fraught with uncertainty. But I think that in this particular area, the level of uncertainty is as elevated as it's ever been in my life. And that's creating a lot of difficult moments in terms of decisions that are being made about how do we think about the future and how do we position our business, our industry for the future to be able to meet the societal demands for changing the way that we run. I think that creates some opportunities for us as well. I personally believe that carbon capture is a very promising and interesting part of our environmental strategy for dealing with climate change. CO2 can be liquefied and transported by ships. It's already beginning to emerge as a means for trying to address climate change internationally. In Europe, in Southeast Asia, there are some pilot projects that are on the books and up and running. For OSG, and for me personally, I think this is an area that we're going to focus on very heavily in the coming decade, which hopefully will create new avenues of maritime jobs and maritime assets to help us move beyond the current climate change problems that we face.
I could agree with Sam. There's seems to be new regulations domestically, a lot of it abroad. We all trade internationally, and EU ETS carbon tax is going to affect 2024. It's pretty dynamic how the industry is going to react to that. We're going to have to pay the tax, but it's all going to eventually pass through. And tracking a lot of this stuff is pretty ambiguous sometimes with some of the enforcement worldwide. But for us, it's change is inevitable, and it's happening quick, and it happened. What happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago doesn't work anymore. And I see a lot of cadets and young officers from Schuyler as a Coast Guard in the room, and we employ, as everyone knows, a lot of these young men and women, and we rely on them when they're on the ships, and eventually some come to work in the office, and they're at the forefront of technology much more than we are, and value that input and able to see things, and it's a different competition than it was for the employee, for the employer than it was years ago, and taking that feedback and educating the next generation that's going to come up, because they're going to be ones who actually affect a lot of this change and be the change agents and the thought leaders in this industry as we go to 2030 and beyond. So I think it's just you have to digest a lot of things and make the best decision for your customer. In our case, a lot of it's the military and Transcom, and it's a challenging industry, and it's an evolving industry, and AI's at the forefront of the industry, and we're trying to adapt to that, and we could talk about some of the things and maybe probably other panels of what we're doing for mariner lifestyle and recruitment and retention, because there is a shortage of mariners in this country, but there's no shortage of talent. So I'll kind of Kevin.
That's something I just wanted to loop back a little bit. I definitely agree with Dion on what Sam said about uncertainty with all these new fuels. and kind of related to maritime strategy. As an example, the U.S. is one of the leaders in clean hydrogen, one of the most efficient and on track to be one of the biggest producers. There's no intention to do anything but they bought tank farms, there's pipelines, there's all the infrastructure to export it, but nothing to do with the maritime piece of it in shipping. Whereas if you talk about the Netherlands, Germany, Korea, Japan, they're all doing the same thing, but they've got import hubs that creates domestic shipping that's part of their national maritime strategy. And so I think things like that just play back to a lack of a maritime strategy within the nation.
What technological sector do you see the money flowing into, of those mentioned by Ryan and Sam?
You're increasingly seeing the suppliers on the IT side that are trying to help towards the energy transition, the ones that are working towards fuel efficiencies. There's quite a few of those who are actually in the process of selling a company that does that. They were initially funded by Microsoft, and they're in a couple of different very large fleets around the world. And that's if you can get 10-15% fuel efficiencies from routing optimization and all things like that, then I'll quickly get over my skis on this stage. But those are the types of things where I think we see the technology side coming in.
I want to shift to recruitment and retention. One of the big issues facing us that we've spoken about earlier is that merit shortage. You've got a very large cohort of the next generation right here in the room with us, cadets and midshipmen. Does anybody want to volunteer where they see the trend going, what their company is doing? How do we fix this problem on a micro and macro level? You got some pretty big heavy hitters in the room here. Take some policy back, but stroke the pen in very quick summary of what you think we could be doing better.
So maybe I'll chime in first, again, speaking from the perspective of principally a Jones Act operator. To me, if I'm 22 years old and I'm thinking about a career at sea, there are pros and cons to the lifestyle that you choose if you work. You are away from home for periods of time. There is some isolation on board ships. You're working 7 days a week. You also get half the year off under the U.S. flag operations. You're basically half the time at sea and half the time at home. And it's, I think, as an intellectual exercise, being part of shipping operation really puts you at the forefront as a raw material of economic activity. You see all of the different elements of the economy at its forefront, and being involved in that and understanding trade flows and understanding your role in that. Certainly that's been a big attraction to me in being part of this industry. With that being said, I think one of the critical elements in thinking about a career is what is the surety, what is the sense of security that I have that there's going to be a job for me in 5 or 10 or 15 years? And that's particularly acute for people that are envisioning a career as an officer, because the time and the effort to become a senior officer on board a tanker or on board a container ship, it's a long process. It takes 8-10 years to be able to climb from being an entry-level person to having the credentials and the experience to be able to play a leadership role on a vessel. And if I'm 22 years old, I'm thinking about that. If I'm going to embark on that 10-year career, I want to know that there's a robust and healthy U.S. maritime fleet 10 years from now, which is going to provide me with a job. Otherwise, why would I invest and take that risk of being able to invest in that career path if the commitment to U.S. flag vessels is uncertain? And so my message to Washington and Admiral Phillips is she's heard me say this many times before. The single most important thing that we can do is to be able to communicate robustly that the commitment to a U.S. flagship is shipping industry is unwavering, and that those jobs and those platforms for careers will be there today, they'll be there tomorrow, and they'll be there decades from now, because the need for those jobs, the needs for those ships will be there to last people through their careers. And I think that really is the most important thing that we can do to be able to incentivize and sustain the type of talent and new entrants into the industry that we need today.
The only thing I would add is, from a finance perspective, the idea of getting into a career on the shipping side, I'd encourage people to think what that means longer term. We do a lot of restructurings, and unfortunately the shipping industry and the offshore oil and gas recently, up until recently, has been in a poor state, so we've had our hands full over the last 10 or 12 years. But when we get into a restructuring, we have to get our hands a bit dirty. We have to understand the operations. We're not going to go out and engage in steel on a vessel, but we have to understand how a vessel works and all the dynamics around that. And the most important thing for us is having people on our staff and people that are 1 degree away from us that we can call up and get that expertise. So there is an opportunity there to understand finance. Obviously, spreadsheets, all that stuff is really important. The Wizards of Wall Street are very good at that. I'm not a wizard of Wall Street. But understanding the finance side, but then getting into these situations where you're working for a finance firm, you're working for a service firm, shoreside, and having that knowledge to be able to give that input into those processes is invaluable. And the best example of that is when a private equity firm, I think this is pretty much across the board these days, but private equity firms bring in operating partners all the time now. I don't think they did that 15 years ago, but they have somebody who understands the shipping industry when they make an investment, and it's a trusted voice. And I would just put it out there that the people that sail every day, and maybe Lois Brockie from International Seaways is probably one of the best examples of somebody coming shoreside and moving on to become the CEO of a large shipping company and understanding the finance side and the operating side.
Go ahead.
I was just say I like to say it takes a village to raise a chief mate. We've got Admiral Margaret doing some great work with the systems, the Maritime Administrator working with Congress, Sarah, I see you over there, she's herding the cats, doing a lot of good work on the Hill, programs like Sea Scouts. I just think there's a lot of moving pieces. It is good to hear that this comes up at pretty much every conference, although it's not great that we have a shortage, but it's important that everybody participates on all the different solutions to get us where we need to get.
Just a couple more minutes. I'd like to give an opportunity to the audience to ask any questions of the esteemed thought leaders up here on stage while you can. Is there any, I'm going to call it from here. I saw somebody's hand raised. Oh, and I can't see who that is, but do we have a microphone, or do you just want to? Okay, go ahead. Yeah. See what you said.
Fair, thank you very much to you and to this panel. I go to a lot, I'm Carleen Walker, wear a lot of hats, but here I'm Maritime, Celebrated for Resilience. I go to a lot of conferences, I run some of them. I want to thank all of you for your honesty today. There was a frankness about this conversation that I rarely hear, and I'm delighted to hear. A year ago, I was at this event when Admiral Fogo said, if we go to war with China tomorrow, I need 100 tankers. I have 1. Well, thanks to NARAD, we now have 10. And Sam, thank you for referencing the fact we need 100. We know what the problems are. We know there's a mariner shortage. We know there's a shipping shortage. There's a sea blindness in this country. There's a naivete in this country. Maybe it's hubris. I don't know. But how do we bridge that gap? It can't just be Ann's problem. It can't just be theirs. How do we bridge the gap between our country as a maritime nation and our vulnerability as a maritime nation?
Can I start?
I would love it, Sam.
So, to try and create a patina of optimism in looking at this problem going forward, one of the things that I've learned is the decades prior to the beginning of the century, military strategy was built upon the notion that we had overwhelming force capabilities, and that any conflict that we might enter into would be shock and awe and be over within a very short period of time. And so for several decades, logistics were de-emphasized. What's the need of having a large, long chain of logistics capability if a conflict is going to be over in 2 weeks? So strategy was built around forward positioning of assets, quick access, quick response, and a belief that there was no need to resupply because everything would be over in a short period of time. The sea changes that occurred in the last 10 years, in my opinion, in listening to the military strategists that I talked to, is a recognition that conflicts that are envisioned in the future are not going to be shock and awe and over in 2 weeks. And therefore, logistics has begun to reemerge as a critical part of planning and thinking. I believe that there is a new urgency that is being applied to how do we plan for and how do we think about those long supply chains that we're going to need to be able to provide in order to project power into the future. And the corollary to that, in my view, is certainly history in the last 100 years or so, deterrence has been a big part of military strategy. So being able to communicate or to be able to show that you have the capability to respond is almost as important as the actual ability to respond. And so I think that the thought process that is evolving is we can't rely on, Dion's words, assured access. We can't rely on assets that we don't have assured access to, because maybe they'll be there, maybe they won't. And if we want to be able to project a readiness capability, then that assured access needs to be visible to our adversaries in a way that they understand. It's not a maybe, it's an absolute. And so I think the combination of a shift towards an ascendancy of logistics back into the military strategy today, and that commitment to understanding that readiness is as important, the projection of readiness is as important as the ability to actually respond. Those are creating a new sense of willingness at Transcom in particular to be able to commit resources to being able to address this problem in the future. It's not an easy fix. Things don't happen overnight. And the sort of steady progress that we need to make, I think is critical. But I think we have made progress in the last 3 or 4 years, and I think there's a genuine cause for optimism that we can continue to make progress. And I think that hopefully will make you feel a little better.
Just to follow on, I think we need to take the lessons learned in the last 40, 50 years, failures, successes, and their lessons learned, but we can't pass blame on those. We need to move forward as an industry and create the industry and move it forward and be dynamic about it. I'd say we lack probably PR. Anytime anyone talks about shipping, it's usually some sort of negative connotation. The supply chain, that wasn't even a shipping issue. I came from the Coast Guard, where you always just did more with less, and you huddle down and you did your job. And I think everyone in this room in the industry, the shipping, Merit, DOT, all the mariners, we do more and we do it with less, and we don't complain. And we're kind of like, you're happy with what they give you. Well, we need to kind of get out there and demand more and be positive about it, because as Sam said, it's a supply chain, logistics, and everything. But no one wants a conflict, no one wants anything, but you need to have assured access to it. I mean, when you get down to a lot of the ways conflicts are won or lost, it is all comes down to logistics. I mean, Rommel ran out of gas. We don't want to run out of gas.
Great. Thank you so much. Folks, let's go ahead and give a round of applause.
All right, to get back to continue with the rest of the day's or the morning's proceedings, thank you very much to FAIR.